Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God the Almighty. By His grace, through the blood of His Son, we're able to enter into the presence of our holy God and our Father this morning. And we're so glad that you can be a part of this assembly. And as always, we want to extend a warm welcome to our visitors. And it's nice to have the Queens with us. And soon they'll be with us and they won't be visiting. So we're looking forward to when they're finally here. Little fun fact, Chloe's maiden name is Kusenberger, which I think is a fun word to say. I just like saying it, Kusenberger. But now she's a queen, so that's a cool name too. So Chloe's a queen now. Treat her like a queen, that the queen that she is. We're glad that they're both here with the kids, with Oliver and Ingrid. And I'm thankful to be back. I was supposed to fly back last Saturday, and there were problems with the airline. And Russ said I should have flown Southwest. I'm sorry that I was on Delta, but I wanted to get back alive mainly, so I didn't fly Southwest. So thankfully, I was able to get home safe and sound. Oh, safe anyway, and I'm thankful to be back. Now, before my class, I'm going to do this to get into the lesson. A lot of times I'll do a little show and tell or something to kind of get things going. And so I've got a little show and tell that has to do with this lesson. We're continuing a lesson from a couple of weeks ago. And at the beginning of that lesson, I mentioned a song by the Bay City Rollers called Saturday Night. This is from back in the 70s, the Scottish pop band, this guy band, boy band. And so later that week, Jerry actually gave me, and I know many of you have received little gifts from Jerry, and he actually gave me, he found the 45 record of that song, and I just thought I'd show some of our young kids here what this is, right? Has anyone of you ever seen this before? Jonathan, do you know what that is right there? No? No? Okay, I'll let you touch it later. Come up after class. But those of us who are older, maybe we'll do cassette tapes for a show and tell as well, and then maybe beta, and then VHS tapes also. But anyway, that's kind of neat. And what we were talking about, that I used that as an introduction to talk about cognitive dissonance, right? This is this term. Psychologists use this to describe this dissonance. You get this tension that characterizes us when we hold a certain belief to be true, and then we encounter its opposite. We encounter something that contradicts it. So A, and then not A, and then there's this tension in our minds because we don't know how to reconcile these things. And I gave that as an example, but we use Saul as a biblical example where he had this experience where he had been denying that Jesus was the Messiah, but he either is the Messiah or he's not the Messiah. Paul clearly did not believe that he was risen from the dead, that he was who he claimed to be. And then Jesus appeared to him, remember? So he had this encounter. So he's confronted with this evidence. He has his own presuppositions that have led him to one conclusion. So that's where he was at that time in his life. But then he has this dramatic personal encounter with the risen Lord. Now he's presented with evidence that contradicts that. And to Saul's credit, he had a good and honest heart, and he gave up his presuppositions, and he left his wrong position to embrace the truth about Jesus. But when he in turn then proclaimed Christ as risen from the dead, that Jesus is the Messiah to his own Jewish brethren, most of them were not willing to accept that evidence. And Paul became himself an exhibit in that line of evidence. He himself was giving testimony, eyewitness testimony to the truth about Christ. But we said that if we're unwilling to give up our presuppositions and if we're unwilling to change our position, then what do we do when we're confronted with this evidence that contradicts it? Well, they tried to deny it. They tried to explain it away and just act like it did not exist. So another example I gave, because you know I like true crime, is, the defendant is either guilty of what he's accused of or he's not guilty. And when the family, we said oftentimes they have trouble believing that a loved one has committed this maybe heinous crime. But when the evidence is presented at trial and the jury makes a verdict based upon that evidence, and it might be, if you're watching these programs, so obvious because they've got DNA and maybe eyewitnesses or maybe even the accused on security camera, on tape. They've got recordings of him committing the crime. And yet sometimes still, because of this emotional bias, because it's so uncomfortable, because it's so difficult to believe certain things that we just don't want to be true, that many times then they'll try to find some strained way to dismiss that evidence. Or we said, now I'm bringing all this up again because we're going to return this to a parallel to this in a moment. Maybe they'll even attack the credibility or the integrity of the jury. Why do we say all that? Because in John 9, we have this amazing miracle. I'm just jumping through these quickly, where Jesus encountered this man born blind and spit in the ground and made mud and put it on his eyes and told him to go to the pool of Siloam and washed. And he did, and his sight was restored. So Jesus performed this miracle on him and caused him to see. But that only takes a couple of verses. This is a long chapter, John chapter 9, and the rest of the chapter is this fascinating and highly instructive conversation and this dialogue and even debate that ends up coming as a result of the miracle, where the blind man is questioned. The Pharisees bring him and they want to know what happened, and they question him more than once, and they even question his parents. So he's confronted by the authorities. And what I love about this man is, having experienced the miraculous power of Christ, he refuses to be intimidated. He really is a model of conviction. And as I said, I think there are some subtle humorous undertones here as well. There's so much to consider, and it says a lot about human nature. There's so much here. The Bible presents the correct view of who we are and the way that we are, and we can learn so much about ourselves and about others when we look at these kinds of insights we get, like we're going to see from this. So, and this could be trouble because my timer isn't working, so let me keep looking at my at the clock here. And by the way, welcome to those of you who meant to come to class and forgot to turn your clocks forward and stumbled in for worship. We're glad you're here. We're glad you made it. I know that happens. So you remember we said, none so blind. Those are the three words we asked you to write at the top of the page. Put them down, or you can just continue where you were in your notes. I intended to do this in 2 lessons. I don't know why I thought I could get all this in 2 lessons. We got to hurry to get this in finally in the 3rd lessons. And I was thinking of you, Miss Olivia, when I added numbers to these points, because I thought it was a little bit confusifying, just going back and forth to the summary of the points and then bringing the points in. So we said this is what we're going to look at. Remember, it's been a couple weeks. First of all, there's confusion, confusified conclusions. There's disagreement among the people as to what actually happened and also as to what it meant. And we said that often happens, and we're not going to go back through that. Then they started looking in more detail at the evidence. But we're going to see that really they were just searching for confirmation of what they already wanted to believe, rather than looking at the evidence to see what the truth really was. And that's really the critical point in all of this. Then we see them end up maligning the messenger, the one who told them the truth about what happened and that they didn't want to be true. That we can be blinded to our own blindness, and that's where Jesus ends at the end of the chapter. That's what we find in the rebuke that Jesus gives to the Jewish leaders. And then we see in how this man reacts, and there's this climax where he submits to Christ when he learns the identity of the one who healed him, and he worships before him. All right, so we're going back to where we left off, where we see now there's an investigation as to what happened. You remember? So in verse 13... In verse 13, they brought him to the Pharisees, the man who had been born blind. It was the Sabbath day. That's the rub here. This is the issue. They thought Jesus was breaking the Sabbath day because of their traditions, that in their interpretation of the Sabbath, in their own laws that they were binding with regard to the Sabbath, what Jesus did, they considered that kneading. You were not supposed to knead dough, they said, on the Sabbath. And so they considered him spitting in the ground and just mixing with his fingers a little mud and putting it on his eyes as breaking the Sabbath. But of course, when they were told to rest and do no work, certainly that would not have included something so minor as what Jesus did. But that was the issue. So they asked the man, and he told them what happened. He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Well, you remember, this is where we left off. They said he's not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. But see, here you see the conflict. Here you see the division. How can a man who is a sinner do such signs, other people were saying? So there was this division. And those are our choices. Either what Jesus claimed about himself was true, and he is from God, or he was blasphemous to make these claims about himself. And he was a sinner if these claims were not true. And there is no middle option here. Everyone must address himself to this issue. Who is Jesus? What am I going to conclude about Jesus? And then, having concluded that, what am I going to do about it? See? So that's the critical point, that Christ is always going to cause division. The truth about Jesus is always going to be controversial, but it's not because there's not enough evidence to convict those who are truly honest with the evidence. That wasn't the problem. As hard as they tried to dismiss the evidence, they couldn't. So the evidence was there. But you see, now let's continue. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, well, he's a prophet. He thought the man must have been commissioned by God. He must have the authority of God somehow to be able to do what only God could do. And so he is correct in that conclusion. But John tells us the Jews. And by the way, John uses that expression frequently to mean specifically the Jewish leaders. So he doesn't mean all the people, but these Jewish leaders. They didn't believe. They did not believe that he had been born blind. Said, no, he couldn't have done this miracle. It must not be that this man was really born blind, or that he really had received his sight from Jesus. Until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight, and they asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? Then how does he see now? This is all very interesting. There's so much to this account. So his parents answered, we know. I've highlighted several times. I want you to notice the bold text as we go through this. I've highlighted several times where people are saying, well, we know this, or we know that, or I know this, and I know that. See, it reminds me of discussions we get in with people and claims we make and engagement on social media. Well, I know this is true. So, well, I know this is true. Well, notice they said, well, we know this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know. Nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself. Now, you think they'd be so excited that their son, who was born blind and had been blind all these years, and they'd say, yes, isn't it wonderful he can see? Why are they being so reserved and evasive? Just, it's almost as though we don't want to get involved, just ask him. There's something going on here. Well, John does this every now and then. He'll give a parenthetical statement with an explanation of what's going on. And he said his parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had already, the leaders, agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. That was a very serious thing, to be excommunicated, because to be banned from the synagogue essentially meant to be expelled from the community, expelled from community life. And so this was a very serious matter, and they were afraid. And so later, John tells us something in chapter 12. Now, moving from that context to chapter 12, where he talks about how, in general, the people didn't believe on Jesus. And he says, but even of the authorities, many did believe in him, but for fear of the Pharisees They did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. Now, here's where John, look at this. Because John, if you just stop there, we might sympathize and understand, and we might not come away with as harsh a view as John gives us. Because when you read on, he says, and here's why they said that, because they loved, these are hard truths. They love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. See, if there's some relationship I have or some life situation I'm in, and being faithful to God would cause me to lose that, I have to ask myself, what do I care more about? That thing I want, that situation, that relationship, or having God's approval? Do I care more about what other people think of me or what God thinks of me? And see, in their case, they were more worried, and of course it would have great consequences for them. They were more worried about the approval of men than the approval of God. And John tells you, he tells you that that's what was in their hearts. That's why they would not confess Christ. And so it's a very serious thing. We have to look into our own hearts. So we go back to the story, and the parents said, he's old enough, just ask him. Therefore, see, John repeats it. He's of age, ask him. So for a second time, so they're really wanting to find a way to get rid of this evidence, to find some alternative explanation. So they call the man who had been born blind, said, give glory to God. In other words, they're saying, you've been lying. You've been lying. So that was an expression they would use to say, fess up, confess, tell the truth. You see that in the Hebrew Bible on occasion, where give glory to God, meaning you're confronting someone who's lying and they need to confess and acknowledge God is right and you're the one in the wrong. So they said, we know. Notice, they're so sure. We know that this man is a sinner. And he said, well, whether he's a sinner, I do not know, but one thing I do know. See, there's some sarcasm here. Well, I don't know if he's a sinner, but I will tell you one thing I know. This I do know. Notice the conflicting claims here. That though I was blind, now I see. Now, we can't deny that. They said to him, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And I love his answer. He could have just told them again and tried to do everything he could to be as conciliatory as possible and evasive, maybe like his parents. But this man's been healed. And I think he's excited, and he's glad, and he doesn't care what they think about his situation. So he says, I've told you already, and you would not listen. See, you've already heard. The problem isn't that you don't know what happened. It's just you don't like what happened because it contradicts what you believe. Don't we all have to think about these things, and when we're teaching other people, take them into account? So he said, why do you want to hear it again? Now, this is the little dig he throws at him. Oh, did you want to become his disciples? Is that why? Is that why you want to know? Because you want to be one of his followers? Well, he knows that's not why. But you see, he's really standing up to them, and he refuses to be intimidated. So what do? And this brings us to our next point. So they malign him. Malign the messenger. When you don't like the truth, a lot of times, and you can't explain it away, then you attack the one who's telling you the truth. And this is what happened. So they reviled him and said, you are his disciples, but we are the disciples of Moses. Notice this again. We know that God has spoken to Moses. Well, that's true. But he said, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from. But once again, the man rebukes him. He says, well, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. You should know where he comes from. Well, why? He says, because we know, notice again, we got to evaluate people's conflicting truth claims, right? Now, this is something they do agree on. some good lessons for evangelism here. He's saying, okay, now look, understand this point, right? He opened my eyes, and we know he wouldn't be able to do that if he's not from God. We know God does not listen to sinners. If he were breaking the Sabbath, violating the law, he wouldn't be able to exercise God's power. But if anyone's a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. If this man... Well, he says, never since the beginning of the world has it ever been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind, not like this. And he said, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They cannot refute that. That is absolutely true. But you see, this is where the cognitive dissonance comes in. They can't reconcile that with what they want to believe about Jesus. They don't want to believe he's the Messiah because he's been chastising them. He's been condemning them. He's been exposing their hypocrisy. And so what do? Well, they resort to ad hominem attack. You were born in utter sin. You see, that's how the chapter started when the disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? We addressed that already. But you were born in sin. Who do you think you are to tell us? Notice the elitism, the condescension, the idea, we're the experts in the law. We're the ones who know what we're talking about. You think you're going to teach us? And they cast him out. And that seems to be meaning formally excommunicated him. They cast him out of the synagogue, the thing that his parents feared, the thing that the others feared that we noted from John 12. So let's look at this now, given what I said in the introduction last week and then went over again at the beginning today. Think about the situation here. All right, either Jesus healed the man or he didn't. So this is our A and not A that we were talking about. Of course, if he did, that shows he's from God. They're starting with the idea he's not from God, so he couldn't have healed the man, and yet they can't refute what happened. So the evidence lines up over here on the side of Jesus healing the man, and that's what the blind man is affirming. That's where he lined up with the evidence. Now the Pharisees, because of their presuppositions and because of their biases, they're not willing to change their minds about what they think about Jesus. So what do? What did we say? They keep investigating it. They keep going over it. They bring in his parents. They bring him in again. They ask him a second time. They're questioning him. They're trying to find some way to say, aha, you see, you weren't really born totally blind, or you didn't really fully receive something, somehow. And then what do they do? What did we say earlier sometimes people do? They ended up attacking the man, right? So we'll see that. Now here's why they're arguing he can't be from God. Because of the Sabbath. He was breaking the Sabbath. Now, if Jesus is from God, right, he would keep the Sabbath. If God sent him and he truly is a spokesman for God as he claimed to be, he would not be violating God's law. But they're claiming he didn't keep the Sabbath, so they know he can't be from God. So you have, once again, these conflicting positions. Well, of course, the evidence showed that he is from God. That's what the blind man argued. Why are you saying you don't know where he's from? If he weren't from God, he couldn't do this. All right, but that's where the blind man lines up, but they want to believe he's not from God. And so what are they basing that on? They were so sure that he broke the Sabbath, but he was breaking their traditions. So here's a very serious matter. You see where we can end up rejecting the truth when we equate, listen, when we equate our own traditions with the truth of God, we can end up rejecting God and his word. It's a very serious matter. We have to be very, very careful and be discerning when we elevate our own traditions to the level of God's commands. And that's what they were doing. Well, they didn't want to believe they were wrong in the way they were interpreting the Sabbath, and so they have to find a way, again, to explain away the evidence. And so what did? They attacked the blind man. Now, we've got a few minutes to try to roll through what I've got left here. But think of this about when it comes to saving truth. And our souls. You see, this is all going somewhere. I hope you can see that. But you know, every proposition, it's important to say it this way, every precisely stated proposition is either true or false. And this is what makes evangelism so difficult in our day is, so many people think, well, no, something can be both true and not true for different people at the same time. I try to pick names that wouldn't be anybody in the assembly this morning. If you're visiting and your name's Sebastian or Tegan, I'm not referring to you, okay? So that's just purely coincidental. But, if Sebastian thinks a given proposition is true, but Tegan says, no, it's not true, because in our day, the evaluative standard in people's minds today is how you feel. That makes it true for you. So if you feel like you're a woman, then you are a woman, and everyone else has to say that's true, and we all have to acknowledge that. Or if you feel, you're an albino ferret or a spider monkey, then that's what you are, because all that matters is you and your subjective feelings, and so you can believe something is true, and somebody else can believe the opposite, and that person can be right as well, and so none of us can make any judgments about anybody else's beliefs. See, that's the idea that contradictory views can both be true. But we know, of course, that's not the case. Now, there are some things that are subjective, that are that way. Take this proposition. Okay. Here's a proposition. All right, let's try to get at the truth about this one, right? God obviously made it prickly and slimy and filled it with disgusting seeds made with sadness and despair. So obviously this would be, it's not true. That's a not true statement. And people who think it's true are just wrong. We both can't be right here, people, right? No, that's a good example if you're visiting. That's a thing with me. So obviously there's going to be different opinions, right? There's a lot of discussion going on in the world of sports, online and among commentators and in publications. Well, who is it? Jordan or James. Okay. Well, but people are talking about it. See, we got some very strong opinions here. I want to be set straight because I want to come down on the right side of this. But people feel very passionately about certain things that are subjective. So they think, and that's the way it is with religion. You might feel very strongly about Jesus and the Bible, and Hindus feel that way about their religion, and Muslims feel that way about theirs, and people in other churches who have contradictory views to our own on fundamental matters of doctrine, they feel very convicted. So everybody is right. But see, we understand that you can't just dismiss all truth claims as being entirely subjective. If you're taking a test and you have to answer, Texas, someone says Texas is in the USA, and someone says no, it isn't. It's in Pakistan. They can't both be right. Like in the true crime case. You can't have a juror saying, well, my truth is that even though we've got video that shows the defendant doing it, and even though he confessed and it was recorded by an undercover officer, and even though we've got all this evidence, but in my world, my truth is that he didn't do it. And so your truth is that he did, but hey, we all got our own truth here, so all of us are right. No one thinks that. We all understand that. But think of serious matters like the claims, fundamental religious claims that Muhammad is God's prophet and we ought to follow his teaching, or that Jesus is the Son of God and the only way of salvation, that the Bible is the truth of God that we ought to heed. Or then when we come down to the content of Scripture and we have disagreements over what's required to do to be saved, and if someone comes along and says, God requires us to be baptized in order to have the remission of sins. And if someone else says, no, that's not true, we both can't be right. And so we've got to look at the evidence. But my point is this whole story, this whole encounter shows you sometimes we let things keep us from seeing the evidence or accepting the evidence. So when you look at the truth, when you look at the evidence there of something that is true, you either have to accept that evidence or this truth. You can deny it. You can live in denial because of whatever presuppositions you're taking to it. But I want you to think about this. What does it take when you've always believed one thing and then you're confronted by something that contradicts it? What does it take to move from denial over here to acceptance? You know, it takes humility. It's hard to say, you know what, I may have been wrong about this. You have to be honest about whatever it is that's confronting you. It may require great sacrifice. Remember, they didn't want to confess Christ because they'd be put out of the synagogue. It would affect their whole lives. Sometimes, though, accepting the truth is hard because of the way other people are now going to view you or treat you, and it may call for suffering. But on the other hand, if you're not willing to accept the evidence and something God has said that we know is true, and that the evidence supports, and you're simply not going to accept it, you know, often that's because of pride. Right? The opposite, what we were saying, it takes humility to change. But a lot of times, I know I've resisted believing things, even when I've had arguments with my wife. Well, let's just say if I had an argument with my wife, I might hypothetically disagree with her. And a lot of times it's hard to swallow your pride and say, okay, you were right, I should have taken the other exit, and now we're lost. So, but let's just say hypothetically that happened. But it's hard to say, okay, you were right. But, you know, to remain in denial requires a dishonesty that can harden your heart. Many times it's because we care more about our own comfort because we're comfortable believing what we believe. And I don't want to have to change churches, and I don't want to have to leave people I love in an environment that I'm familiar with and I'm comfortable with. See? If I believe what you're telling me about the Bible, you know, that's going to change everything for me. But it requires a willful blindness. Remember, this is the idea of the blindness here. None so blind as he who will not see. It's not that we cannot, but we will not. So if we want to get people to embrace saving truth, now we're almost done. I think if we want to get people to move, and someone loved me enough to try to help me and get me to move from one side to the other where I was lining up with the evidence of Scripture. And I didn't know what the Scripture said. And when he first showed it to me, I couldn't accept it. But you know, it takes patience. We have to realize it is hard. And a lot of times the light doesn't come on right away because the implications are really great. What, you're saying I've been lost all these years? All this time that I've been worshiping, it hasn't been right? That's a lot for a person to have to come to grips with. I think we need to be sympathetic of how difficult it can be. But it takes enough conviction to really tell people the truth even when it's hard. Because I know there's a temptation to want to say, well, it doesn't really matter because, you know, maybe we feel like we don't want this person to have to suffer, and we don't want them to feel like that we feel we're superior. But you've got to be convicted for the truth, or you can't convert anyone. It takes conviction, and it takes boldness in a world where you're not supposed to say you know you're right. Look at what everyone was saying in that whole episode. I know this. No, well, I know this. Well, one thing I know is this man's a sinner. Well, I know he opened my eyes. Well, I know this. It reminds me of the comment thread on YouTube videos and in social media, the way people go at it. But you have to be bold enough to say, well, no matter what anybody else thinks, you've got to be willing to stand on the truth, and we have to be persuasive to try to be effective in convincing other people. But one thing we must never do is compromise saving truth to avoid hurting people's feelings. Because if I do that, not only will they not be saved, but I won't be either. So you see how weighty this is? Now finally, now you're worried, wait, he's still got 2 points to go. Didn't he say there was a number 5 and the Baptists are already lining up at the cafeteria? They're going to beat us to lunch. Oh, no, we're just about done. But at the end, Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see. Jesus uses these enigmatic statements all the time that you got to think about. What does that mean? And those who see may become blind. Well, the Pharisees realize he's talking about them. So some of the Pharisees near him, they heard these things, and they said, oh, are we also blind? Are you saying we're like this blind man when he was in his blindness? Are you calling us blind? You see, they get the point. And Jesus said, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. If you'd just be honest enough to admit your need, if you would see that you're blind and you need my light, then you'd be able to see. You wouldn't have any guilt, but because you think you know it all and you're not willing to accept it, because you say, oh, we see, we know, your guilt remains. We've got to recognize our own blindness before Jesus can open our eyes. Does that make sense? It's like what he said in Matthew 13 when he cited Isaiah. And Isaiah talked about, because their eyes, they have closed. And see, if I'm not willing to open my eyes, even Jesus himself cannot open them. Why? Because then they'd have to change. Lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn. That's repentance. You see, and if I don't want to change, then I can just close my eyes, but it doesn't change the truth, does it? But this is where it all should lead. We should be willing, when we understand the truth. See, it should change our whole lives. And that's what happens with this man. It's such a tender scene. It's so beautiful in the midst of all this controversy and antagonism. Finally, he doesn't know what Jesus looked like. He was blind when Jesus sent him to the pool. But Jesus felt sympathy for him. He heard they cast him out, and he found him, and he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? They knew Son of Man. That meant, that's the way they referred to the Messiah. That's what Daniel said about the Messiah. Do you believe in the Son of Man? And he said, who is he, sir? That I may believe in him. And Jesus said, you have seen. I like the way that Jesus doesn't just say, well, I'm the Son of Man. You have seen him. See the play on words? You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. This reminds me when Mary saw him in the garden. She says, where have they laid my Lord? And he says, Mary. And she recognizes him. Rabboni. Now he realizes that you're the man that healed me. And what did he do? Lord, he acknowledged him as Lord. He said, I believe, and he worshiped him. When we open our eyes and allow Christ, the light of Christ, to come into our hearts and change our lives, we give ourselves to him. We serve him. We worship him. We live for him. We fall down before him. Life then becomes about honoring and praising our Lord who opened our eyes. Isn't that a beautiful lesson to take from this tremendous encounter? Let us pray that if there's some blind spot we have, if there's something we've been resistant to, that the Lord would help us to see it, that the Lord would help us to open our eyes, to let his light, to let his truth come in and change our lives now and forever. If we can help you through that, if you can help us, let us know. Let's stand and sing this song together.